Okay. Okay. Now we're on the air and being recorded. For anyone who is not here and wants to watch the archive or is trying to get into the session, I apologize. I thought I had it all sorted out, but clearly I did not. I think that, well, Google has this thing where they will push stuff out and then just kind of keep tweaking as they go. And I feel like Hangouts is one of their more clever recent features, but it's also one of the ones that's got rougher edges.
Yes, just a few.
So, the question is, since we've chatted about individual issues, and neither of you. Okay, well, let me start here. Do either of you have any questions or thoughts about the content on comics this week? Because that's something that will actually flow over in part into next month's class with Mark McCain, where you will be writing an animation script, but will also have the option, if you prefer, to write a comic script.
Ooh. I don't know.
Something to keep in mind.
Well,
you might want to.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I've loved comics ever since I've been a kid, and I don't know what it is about comics that I love. It's just everything from Charles Schultz to the BC comics to, I mean, I used to collect them as a kid at my grandma's house. It was insane. So I collected all the Sunday ones because they were in color and they weren't, black and white. Right. So I really enjoyed them. And then just Little Lulu and just all the Heathcliff and all the ones that I really enjoyed. And I just could never figure out, I couldn't figure out in my head how they got there. And so that always intrigued me.
Well, an interesting thing about that collecting the Sunday comics or collecting comic strips from the newspaper in general, private collectors who kept personal archives of...
I gave them all away, but go ahead.
Well, now is a different story. Now everything is archived by the syndicates. But the only reason we have most of the comics we have that are from the first half of the 20th century that were newspaper comics is because of private collectors who kept large collections of original newsprint.
Sweet! That's awesome.
It used to be that libraries had archives of old newspapers.
Yes.
Most of those archives, when microfiche reached a point of sufficient development, were replaced by microfiche archives. And the thing is, the quality of a microfilm or microfiche medium, perfectly sufficient for reading text. Not sufficient to reproduce anything like the quality of the original newspaper comics art. So collectors, including Bill Blackbeard, his was the single largest collection.
Oh, wow.
Are the reason why you can get volumes now of everything from well-known comics like Little Orphan Annie to some of the to Crazy Cat, which is a personal favorite of mine. There's one to look up. Crazy Cat, spelled with a K for both crazy and cat, or Little Nemo. I don't know if you've yeah. And I actually had a chance when I was at the University of Florida. Michael, going back to the fact that I did my doctorate there, they acquired a large archive from a couple of collectors. They'd had some materials, including newspaper strips that went back to, I think the earliest one was something like 1904, and I got to work with those materials. Yeah.
And I felt silly for collecting them. I mean, I had stacks upon stacks, and just finally, it was like, what are you going to do with these? And then went straight to the trash.
Well, I had my own little stash of Sunday comics collections, but mine did not last nearly as long. My mother got rid of that when I was, I'm not sure exactly what age. Maybe about your daughter's age.
Yep, exactly. Mine, I think, was about 12. What are you going to do with these? I don't know. I just really like them. And there they went.
Oh, I almost lost my comparatively small collection of comic books the same way. I had to sort through the comic books I'd acquired and kind of start doling out ones that could be given away to the goodwill just to
Yeah,
protect the ones that I actually really wanted to keep because I knew if I didn't
those are
do it,
insane. I went to Comic-Con and almost fell out my
oh,
chair. I was like, what? I'm
yeah,
like, a few of those, I was like, I had those. I had those in my hand. What? Just like insane.
yeah. Well, and now collect new comics for the whole family, ranging
Oh,
from
nice.
the
What's the
family titles
what's the
to
Wicked? What was that?
The Wicked and the Divine. This is a
Oh,
brilliant comic.
who writes that?
It's Kieran Gillian
Oh, I love it.
and with art by Jamie McKelvey.
Oh, I'm gonna
Um,
have to check it out.
yeah, totally do. It's previously these guys together had done a comic called Phonogram, and this is kind of an informal sequel to that. That is to say, it doesn't strictly take place in the same universe, but
Okay.
it's drawing on the same ideas, and that is that they're well, okay. In Phonogram, music, just popular music and indie music, stuff you'll really connect to. Not
Right.
necessarily the most popular stuff, but the stuff you'll form the deepest connections with,
Right.
has magical power. The main character in Phonogram is a phonomancer. He uses,
Nice.
yeah, he uses music from like 90s era Britpop to work magic.
Sweet.
This, in this, you have like 12 immortal deities who get reincarnated about every 70 or so years, and
I
they do
love
so in they do so in forms that relate deeply to what people are passionate about. So again, Kieran Gillen is bringing his background as a music critic, and they are all pop icons. They not real world pop icons, but inspired by various forms of alternative and underground music and such. And
Nice.
yeah,
Like it a lot.
yeah. So uh, I don't remember if I said this to your class before, but I might have. I think I said this in the other Google Hangout. But comics alongside games those are my great loves as media. I love
Oh.
what we both can do.
Well, I haven't
Um,
had a chance to look at all of our assignments, but what do we need to do with that comic? I think I looked at it during the last class and what had to be done just because I just wanted to glance at it and I saw comics and I like comics, but I didn't get a chance to read it all.
well, in my class, really the only work that you strictly have to do, strictly, on comics is the discussion board for this week.
Okay.
Um, but there's a lot of extra material on comics that
Right.
is there in particular for people who are working on a comic script for their thesis, but also for everyone else who has an interest. So, Tammy, you should dig into that stuff.
I
Um,
will. I
the,
love
comic,
comics.
the comic book script archive is really something to see. For one
Nice.
thing, a bit like game design documents, comic book scripts are at best very loosely standardized. So you will see all sorts of things, and I give you links including to scripts that are very nearly screenplay format,
Oh,
and to a script by Alan Moore that basically is a case in point for why Alan Moore is a brilliant writer, but one that you should not in every point emulate. Among other things, it is mostly in all caps.
involved. It's all cow. That would make me noodles.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if instead of being a world famous comics writer, though one of the most thoroughly iconoclastic icons in comics writing of the past, I don't know, 30, 40 years, um, if he were a student in my class, I would be telling him, your ideas are incredible, but some of your descriptions are overwritten. You've got 3 paragraphs describing a detail in this one panel that the artist may not be able to render, and turn off the caps lock. Turn off the caps lock.
Oh my goodness. That reminds me of the Batman comics.
Yeah. So, yeah, comic scripting is kind of out there, and one of the things that offers as an inspiration for anyone doing any kind of scripting, screenwriting, games cutscenes and such, is you will see people do things that would never be done in other media. And for the most part, you'll go, okay, well, this could have been done more conventionally, neatly this way. But you will also see some interesting ideas played out, including things you might not think of when they are used to working within a strict paradigm.
Okay.
It's not that the rules are bad. It's just that any set of rules helps create a kind of way of thinking.
Okay.
And those ways of thinking sometimes can become limited. You see this, for example, with some of the models for screenwriting. All the models for screenwriting, all the plot points and such you get taught in this program are helpful. You need to learn them.
Frustrating at times, though.
You need to learn them, and then as you learn them, and as you become more comfortable with them, you need to make sure that you don't completely internalize them and stop and think of them as the only way to write a screenplay or anything else.
Yeah, that's where I got stuck.
I think that you will probably find, as long as the flow of your story is good, that in the portfolio classes at the end of the program, if you don't hit every beat or every plot point, that you will not automatically be punished for it.
Oh, sweet, because those things, I mean, the best way I can explain it is I can see it in my head. It's like understanding the word, a different word, but then somebody says, what does that mean? And you're like, I know what it means. That's all there is. I know what it means. And now I have to tell you, no, I just know it. So it's really difficult.
When it comes to the creative side of things, many people will tell you you have to learn the rules before you can break them. I kind of agree. I think there's also a degree to which it is important to learn how to break the rules before you become imprisoned in them. You have to know the rules well enough to appreciate what they're there for.
Yes.
But the greatest work never comes out of strictly following the rules, or rather, out of strictly following all of the rules.
Well, no, and I think, I have OCD, so that really hurts me because now I'm trying to, stay in the paradigm so I can get the grade, and at the same time, then you guys say, okay, read this script. So then I read the script like Die Hard, and I'm thinking, that looks not what I'm giving you. I'm a little confused because it doesn't quite follow the complete arc of the hero's journey because it doubles back on itself, which is totally fine. Yet it's confusing when you're like, and give me this. And then I'm thinking, I would like to do that, but this rule says I can't do that.
And, and different people have different approaches.
Yes, you all do. And so it makes it harder sometimes to say, okay, I want to get a good grade in this class, so I better do it whatever way they said.
And some of the professors early in the program can be very strict about the models they're using. And some of that is because it is a condensed program, because it is an accelerated program, that they want to make sure you at least know one effective way for telling a story before you get in the middle of your script and then find yourself lost. So I'm curious, Michael, since you're here, if you don't mind, you can let me know if you mind answering this question. If you do, I will move on to something else. How have you felt that the kind of screenwriting-focused story structure elements in the program have been helpful to you, and in other places where they've been counterproductive for you?
where they've been helpful and where they have not been helpful.
Yeah.
Just anything in general?
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying uh, either in terms of specific places where they helped or didn't help with your thesis in particular, or things that with your experience of gaming just were either things like, oh, that makes sense now, or felt like a profound misfit. If there are things that you can think of, either very specifically or generally, that you're comfortable sharing. And again, we are recording, so if it's like, well, if I say that, it'll sound like I'm bashing this instructor, then feel free to skip it or just pass that back to me.
Or encode it.
Right.
I guess in general terms, I don't want to bash the instructor. I don't remember what her name was, but it was the character development instructor. Would just destroy you for any grammar mistakes. You made 3, she gave you like a 85, and it was like, I'm stepping on eggshells trying to overthink what I'm writing. I'm focusing less on the content and more on the structure, and I felt that was detrimental. I understand the need to have good structure, but when I'm worrying more about the structure than the content, I feel like that ruined the class for me, and I had high hopes for the class.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I've heard people say that the fact that grammar mistakes counted off really heavily was a big challenge, or even a distraction for them in the character class.
It is.
Go ahead.
I guess a positive is that the instructors do give you, for the most part, enough freedom that you can work on your thesis or work on something that you want to. It's broad. The broadness is good, I guess, for the program and so far.
Yeah, I think that's something that, for the most part, we all value. To give you a point of comparison, something that I found a little frustrating but also amusing. In the first graduate level creative writing class I took, which was not at UF, but the instructor said, when talking, it was short story prose. That's all we were writing. I forget how he got there. He was talking about this and that, and then says something about, it says, and I really don't get comedy. And then he goes on to elaborate about how he believes that writing is this kind of deeply important practice that reveals things about human nature. And I was just gobsmacked, both by the instructor not quite actually saying don't write comedy, but all but saying I don't want comedy stories, no humor, and then saying, almost more amazingly to me, that comedy couldn't be deeply meaningful or revealing. Sometimes it's easier to get really challenging ideas across in comedy because you disarm your audience a little bit with the joke. It's a bit like sometimes, and this is one of my biases, some people may disagree, but I think that sometimes it is possible to get at really deeply challenging and controversial topics in science fiction and sometimes also horror and fantasy without being off-putting because it's at a little bit of a remove from everyday life. That remove allows those topics to be addressed without immediately people's defenses going up and going, no, you can't be saying anything bad about fill in the blank, whatever it is. But so then being a impudent whippersnapper of a student, I'm grateful he didn't fail me. The next thing I wrote, and this is after he had talked about the importance of realistic fiction, how he didn't get comedy, about writing what you knew, I wrote a story, a comedy, about a gnome who is trying to get a shot of espresso out of a gigantic steampunk espresso machine, and you only find out that that's his goal at the very end of the story. So it's the whole time trying to get this doomsday device or whatever it is to work, and then finally he gets his cup of coffee. And that was the end of the story. And like I said,
Nice.
I was just asking for it. I was begging for it. I am so glad he didn't fail me.
We all do.
But, yeah. So, you know.
I guess another positive, I guess, from this class, the twine, I find after I learned how to use it, I started using it as just a mapping tool for other like side projects. And I remember distinctly in the script criticism and analysis class, we had to, that was when we first started doing any work on our thesis. We did a big outline of it, and he gave us this Word document. It was real clunky, and I felt like if we had twine for that instead of that clunky worksheet, it'd be much easier just to break each scene down into, or each beat, as he called it, onto one passage. And I felt like I don't know.
And I've heard that before from students who really got into twine, for whom it really worked well. And that's one of those things that is a challenge, is that for some people, getting into twine and finding how your flow in twine, it's natural. For other people, even after they manage to get their stuff done in it, it still is a very unfamiliar and difficult way of working.
Twine's a lot of fun. You just have to...
I'm glad you found it to be fun once you got going, Tammy, because you know I didn't want to say you know you found it somewhat challenging to get going with twine, that I didn't want to say yes and everything should be done in twine forever after.
Right, exactly. Well, I think what was really exciting about twine is I'm always thinking ahead, so I think from the other classes, I really wish I would have thought of it earlier, that with twine, maybe in your future you might want to use this, but what I really enjoyed from another class was using the 15 index cards and then putting your story and then breaking it down. So that seems like it would have been nice to have the cards, and then I could have done that and then just put it onto twine. So I just didn't think ahead enough.
Well, that's something I'll keep in mind as something I can remind people about when we're starting twine. That, you know, one way to make that, if for people for whom that kind of, because you did that on actual, did you do that on actual physical index cards, or are you talking about the index card feature in Final Draft?
No, actual index cards. I work. I learned in creative writing because I got my BA in creative writing, and one of the professors who did plays, he was a playwright, and he got stuck, and he just stagnated, and he couldn't figure out what was going on. And somebody said, "Have you written with your pen? Have you put pen to paper?" And he's like, "Yeah, I do that every day." And he's like, "No, an actual pen to the paper." And he's like, "Well, I put it in my computer." And he said, "No, pick up a pen." So he picked up a pen, and by darn, if everything, whatever the connection is, he was able to do it. He got his play out there, and he got, noted, and now he teaches at San Francisco State. And it was just nice to hear that it's more important to get that paper and the pen. So I really like the index cards because there were things that I saw better when I used the index cards to break down my scenes and gave me more meat to my story than just putting it on a computer and looking at it in 2D format.
Well, and here's the thing. First, I need to run this down. There are studies, at least there was one recently, that has shown that you use the different parts of your brain, not entirely different, but certain different parts of your brain are active when you're typing, when you're printing, and when you're writing in cursive. There are actually different parts of the brain that are active for all three of those.
Wow.
And here's something that's really important. For some people, that is really important. For other people, it's not terribly important. And it's part of why one of the things I view, any educational program as you get experience with a bunch of different tools. Uh, some of them quite well, tangible is not the word I'm looking for because software isn't exactly tangible, but some of them are tools in the external sense that you can use, and many of them, and most of the more important ones, are conceptual tools. And you have to figure out, as you're going through, you generally have to make sure that you use the tools that that instructor requires for those purposes. You have to figure out which tools work for you. And one of my goals in this class is to provide people with some additional tools that even for those who will never do games writing again, they might find something that works for them in the process that they might, for example, not have been thinking about going back and writing character bios, but find that doing barks kind of help them nail something about a character's personality and write a bunch of, you might call them throwaway lines to help get a character down.
Okay.
Or that they will find that twine helps them map out their ideas. There are always multiple approaches to a problem. That doesn't mean that they're all equally good, but what I think it generally does mean is that what works for an individual is often comparably as important or even more important than what on average is the most efficient approach to the problem. And when it's creative stuff, I think that's especially true. So you have to try and take it all in and give it a chance. And then you have to figure out which things you're going to go back to and use again.
Right.
So, and that's again, one thing I really appreciate about this program, the reasons I'm here, is that it is open in certain ways that many creative writing programs aren't.
Yes.
Not just in terms of medium, of course. There are very few. I actually hear that there are a few programs that are now starting to become interested in, they're more likely to call it something like digital literacy or digital literature than games writing. But they're increasing interest in certain aspects of software-mediated, online, and sometimes actually playable stories. But in a traditional creative writing program, in many cases, there's a focus on a specific academic style of writing and on prose fiction and poetry only, or sometimes sometimes traditional stage plays.
That's pretty interesting that you say that, because that's exactly why San Francisco State doesn't do that. And San Francisco State was very open, and I learned many different ways and many different options of things that I could and couldn't do. That's the only reason I knew I could step outside the box a little bit with screenwriting. I just didn't know how far outside the box I could or could not step.
Right. That's good to know. That's very good to know. I actually, when I was looking at grad school, considered creative writing at that point, but I wound up going for, my path was strange because I wanted to write about games and comics, and I had an interest in the kinds of writing that were done in those works. And I found that it was easier, still some effort, but to find people who would let me do scholarship about video games than people who would let me write game fiction. And it's not that's not the whole of what my decision-making process was. It was an important part of it. Okay. So I know we've got a late start, but it's now 11:15, and I think we've covered some things that I'm hopeful will be interesting and helpful to people who just tune in. Do either of you have anything else you wanted to talk about before we call it a night?
A quick question.
Uh-huh.
Oh, before we started recording, we talked about a little bit about my thesis, and you said something that got me thinking.
Okay.
like an offline kind of conversation. Maybe it's better medium for that. So I'll send you an email.
Okay. Okay, I'll look forward to it. So, Tammy,
So
anything?
we're good.
Okay. Well,
Because it's not 11 o'clock in California.
right. Right. Yes. Yes, exactly.
Right.
Well, Michael, Tammy, it's been good talking to both of you, and feel free to follow up with me about anything that we've talked about here or other materials related to the program or writing in any meaningful way.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And to anyone who's watching, I hope you found this, to some degree, educational, enlightening, or at least interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
Have a good night, guys.
Good night, everybody.